All right, so I call this meeting of the Garrett Park Town Council to order. Time is 7:31. Do I need to read this statement for the record? About the closed meeting?
It probably wouldn't hurt, Joanna.
Okay, all right. On May 10th, 2022 at 8:04 p.m., the council met in person in open session remotely by Zoom conference to entertain a motion to enter closed session. Present on the call were council members Jerry Lee Bennett, Donna DeBosch, Lisa Max, Phil Schulp, and Steve Piskowski. Also on the call was interim town manager Barb Matthews. Councilmember Schulp moved to go into closed session pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article Section 3305B7 to consult with council and obtain legal advice regarding stormwater drainage measures in the town and matters pertaining to property gifted to the town of Garrett Park. Councilmember Max seconded the motion, which was approved unanimously. Additional participants in the closed meeting were town attorney Ron Bolt and Jason Azar of Clark Azar and Associates. He's our engineer. The mayor and town council received legal advice on the two subjects identified. No action was taken. The closed meeting adjourned at 10:21 p.m.
Joanna, I just wanted to mention, Donna just texted me. She's having some difficulties connecting.
Okay.
So I think she's trying to reconnect now.
Okay.
I'm here.
Thank you, Donna.
Sorry about that. Not sure what's going on.
Let's see. So are there any additions, deletions, or adjustments to the agenda for tonight?
This is Jerry Lee. I would like to be able to make a very brief announcement about an update on the Strathmore Avenue redevelopment.
Okay, shall we add that into the town updates?
Yeah, we could add it like after the Arboretum update, and I'll just do it real quick.
Sounds good. All right. Okay, anything else? All right, any, let's see, need a motion to approve the agenda in a second, please.
Bill, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
And in a second, please.
This is Jerry Lee. I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 I need two more. Donna and Lisa.
I approve. I
Okay.
second.
Voting to approve. Donna.
Approved. Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. With that, the agenda is approved. Moving on to the minutes. We have before us two sets of minutes. The May 9th council meeting minutes. Any changes to that? Or can we approve those?
Got one minor change. And it is, oh shoot. Anyway, it's the one where we go to approve the minutes and Stephen abstains, but it says that we've approved the minutes unanimously.
Okay.
So I would like to strike the word unanimously,
Okay.
unless somebody's got an objection. Oh, no, I'm good.
Any others? All right. With that change, I need a motion, or I can do this by unanimous consent. Without objection, the meetings are approved by unanimous consent. Save us a moment of voting. And then moving on to the May 10th closed meeting minutes. My understanding is that these are not available to the public because they are from a closed meeting. But council members, if you have any changes to those, any concerns about those minutes?
No concerns.
No? Okay. Without objection, the minutes of the closed meeting are approved of the unanimous consent. Okay. Look at this. It is 7:35 and we're moving on to presentations by residents. Do we have any residents who would like to chime in on something? Going, gone. Excellent, excellent. 7:36, unfinished business. Now, I wanted to make a comment about this. It's something that we previously called old business, and we're in the process. I'm at the Maryland Municipal League Summer Conference, and there have been a lot of exciting things that I've sort of picked up on and gotten advice on, especially with relating to how we hold our council meetings. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking at is what we call things on our agenda, how we put things in order, that kind of thing. So that's kind of part of what's going on here. So unfinished business is something that we've brought up in the past, discussed in the past, but have not yet acted on. And so we are the first item there is the delegation of responsibilities. We have a number of council members who are perfectly happy with well, actually we have two who are wonderfully happy with their areas of responsibility. Councilmember Bennett has said that she wants to continue with the Arboretum Committee and the Strathmore redevelopment and the nursery school. Councilmember Bennett, the 5G small cell tower, I actually don't know anything about that. Is that something that is still on our radar that we need to keep an eye on?
I think it's okay to keep it there. There's not a lot of action since the county passed their amendment, but I think I've had it on my to-do list. We should check with the attorney to make sure there isn't any advice to change our resolution, which was passed before the county acted. So I think there's, and then also just monitoring for any installations that are very close to the town.
Okay. Okay. And Councilmember Paskowski, you have indicated that you want to keep going with Land Use Advisory Committee, the Town Hall Renovation and Historic Preservation Committee. I don't know Thrive Montgomery 2050. Is that something that we need to keep on this list?
Not necessarily. I think it's mostly settled. It was sent to the county for approval, and they're not gonna turn back on it. It's really a kind of like the high level planning for the region.
Okay.
Up to 2050. So, but they're sold on it.
All right. All right. Councilmember Schultz, I talked with you about you've had several new responsibilities placed on your shoulders in recent years, and you indicated that you might be willing to share some of the burden a little. You want to hold on to utilities and town streetlights, and you want to hold on to parks and open spaces, and you'll hold on to street sidewalks and curbs. But stormwater management, that is an area that you that would not hurt your feelings to maybe disengage a little bit.
Yes, I would be happy to help somebody with it. I could maintain it if nobody wants it, but I would be happy. I hope you can hear me. I'd be happy to help anybody who would want to take that on. I think that the biggest thing now is just working to come to a resolution of what we own versus what the county owns and what's going to be the end of that. And I think that, yeah, that's it. So basically dogging that issue, which with the other stuff, I don't have as much time. So if somebody wants it, I'd appreciate if they take it. If not, I'll continue.
So at the moment, like you said, it's an ownership issue that we're dealing with. And so it's more communication as opposed to active planning a project. Not to mean that there won't be active projects coming up very soon. This is definitely an important issue that we need to address. Toot sweet. But I'm not quite sure about that one. How about let's put that on hold for a moment. Councilmember DeBosch, the traffic and parking, is that something that you are interested in continuing working with, and the Women's Club and GP Can?
If I'm of assistance in those positions, then yes.
Okay. And the ARPA and COVID financial relief assistance, that's something that you've been instrumental in on to this point. Is that something that we can count on you to keep us going on those things?
Absolutely.
Okay. I had an idea that is somewhat related to traffic and parking, and that is, I actually don't know if I should, is maybe pursuing the possibility of, oh gosh, of a roadway to the elementary school. There might be a possibility of something possible. There's a possibility of a possible something there. And if you would be interested in that as part of the traffic and parking as a project that we could loop you in on and get you to work on, that would be really, that would be a big thing.
I understand. And if that makes sense, absolutely. And look forward to maybe being debriefed at some point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Councilmember Max, the areas of responsibility for former Councilmember Grande were the Archives Committee, the Garrett Park Citizens Association, Safety and Security, and Neighbors Helping Neighbors. Would those areas interest you in being a liaison and helping out there, taking part there as needed?
Yeah, I'm the one thing that I would like to be added to with Steve is the renovation of the town hall. That's really something that's really interesting to me and something that I think I could be helpful with, as well as the renovation or whatever we decide to do with Penn Place. But I could take those things on as well if nobody else wants to do them. I'm happy to step up.
The town office renovation was something that I had written as wanting to tap you for.
Right.
You bring a lot of experience in that and in that kind of work, and so I was going to ask. I was going to ask. And town hall renovation. How about you and Councilmember Paskowski give that a chat and see how we can, use your experience on that. There were a couple of things, one thing in particular that interests me that I picked up here, and that is risk management and how we don't, well, this could be just my ignorance, but aside from paying our premiums to legit, our insurance company or insurance pool, I guess I'm not quite sure what it's called, but aside from that, do we give appropriate attention to our liability in the town? And so I thought that was a topic that might fit with someone, that could be something that a council member could take on. It's more of a being on top of things sort of thing. It could be you sort of be the person who would remind us, hey, we're about to buy a new piece of equipment for our maintenance crew. Have we looked at all the things, have we taken care of all the responsibilities related to buying that, in terms of insuring it, in terms of making sure that we have appropriate storage space, that kind of thing. And also that person would be responsible for maybe making a checklist and sort of keeping track of our assets and just doing a regular, maybe a quarterly walk around the town to make sure that our streets are in good condition. Not that we don't have lots of residents who do that for us on a regular basis, but just adding that extra level to make sure that we are managing our risk and our liabilities. What do y'all think of that?
I think it's important.
I think it makes sense. I agree.
I don't know that it'd be a super heavy lift, but I think that it's something that we need to keep an eye on.
May I ask a question?
Please.
So what is your vision in maintaining that, besides, as you mentioned, someone just double going around town, checking how do we identify what our, assets are that we need to protect or, take care of or pay attention to?
well, it's our streets, it's our sidewalks, it's our streetlights, it's our
Vehicles,
vehicles,
equipment.
our real property, those kind of things.
So I would think that perhaps putting together a list of what those things are, so whoever's maintaining or paying attention to those things knows what to follow up with.
Yes, absolutely. Councilmember Bennett, you have your hand raised.
Hi, I was wondering, is this something that we really need a council member assigned to, or is it something that's more appropriate with perhaps the chief of maintenance as a responsibility?
It's, I don't know that it needs to be one or the other. I think that it can be a way of making that issue of keeping an eye on our risk, keeping that in our own, in mind for the council. And I don't know that it necessarily just needs to be an administrative thing. Barb, I know I didn't talk with you about this, but but is there anything that you would, any insight, point me in the wrong, am I going in the wrong direction with this, or is this redundant, or what do you think?
No, I don't think it's redundant at all. I was filling out our kind of renewal application for the local government insurance trust, and it's a little bit harder the smaller you are, because you don't have a risk manager and you don't really have enough staff to have safety committees. But I think there probably are some good models out there from Legit, and I can reach out to the staff. I don't think it's that we're not paying attention to it, but I think a little bit more formality and structure around it, just to make sure we're being vigilant, would probably be helpful.
Okay. Well, we can table this idea, and it can be something that we look into and bring back and come back around to. So that leaves stormwater management. Phil, do you think you could hold on to it for the time being, and while we're in this process of just kind of figuring out the ownership aspect, because we don't really know what we're getting ourselves into. And so, okay.
Yeah.
So for the moment, if you don't mind, and then we'll, that's definitely something that's really important to me as well. So I'm try to share that burden with you. Is there anything else that we should have in mind? And we have other aspects. There's certain things that we don't need, like Jerry, like you or Councilmember Bennett, you pointed out, does this need to be something that goes to the council, or is it something that can be done administratively by staff? Is there anything that needs council attention, that we need liaising, that we need a good communication?
So I will say that by default, if for nothing else, I tend to function as a liaison to the Garrett Park Swimming Pool Association because of my close association with
and proximity.
So I was gonna hang on to that just because it's easy, and I got a pretty good inside track on that one. So
you can see it from your house.
I can see it from my house, and I hear it every day, including all the good stuff that happens that I can't discuss.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Are we gonna move on? Great. Okay.
Just,
Donna has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that. I'm
thanks.
sorry.
Oh, no, that's
I'm
okay.
going to blush. Go ahead.
Would a council member be useful in relaying the renovations to town hall or the offices, excuse me, town offices?
Yes. Councilmember Max is going to
Very good.
take the lead on that.
Okay, that part as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Wow. Okay. So speaking of renovation to town offices, that's the next item on our agenda, looking at the needs assessment study. Now, I just want to mention up front that we had a meeting with the design team that had been contracted to look at our space and to make suggestions. We are not going to make a decision about this tonight, but it would be great for us to just sort of share some ideas and get a pulse as to what direction we're heading, if we're heading in a particular direction. And I think sort of the heavy lift on this is something that we will be punting, or not punting, but I think there's more discussion to be had and more information to gather. So let's see. Anybody want to start off with sharing ideas, or should I give an overview?
I'd like to just say that a resident called me today and expressed a question as to whether the space plan should incorporate an assistant manager, because I don't think the town council has approved that position. Is that correct?
It's not. It was approved for the 2023 budget, and that funding
Okay.
will become available at the beginning of July.
Okay, so we are going to put that position in. Okay, so we're going to fill that position. So then we should have a place for that person to work. All right, that's good to know.
Right.
Thank you.
So the big picture is we looked at rearranging this space, updating, modernizing this space that we currently have, or taking over the space. There's a small office to the front of the third floor, right next to the elevator, or adding the space toward the back of the third floor. Both of those two had previously been rented as office space. And so we sort of looked at different configurations of that as to what amenities, what size conference room we could have, or would people have individual office space, things like that. So that's kind of the big picture. And I think there are other ways of looking at it. I think one idea that comes to mind is considering whether we actually looked at all the possibilities, that we could perhaps shift our focus and move to the back of the space and have the space that's currently the mayor's office connect with the larger space next to it that had previously been rented out, and maybe we find a renter for the front of the current office. I mean, there are different things that I don't know were ever considered, and I don't think that we're not stuck with, we don't have to go with one of the suggestions that has been made by our contractor, the design contractor, just because we've paid them to do so. We can still think outside the box and consider other things.
I think we'd also talked about potentially moving the archives out of the basement, incorporating that into some of the space that we're renovating.
So there were a couple issues with that. One was about if there was a fire concern, that if there were a fire in the building, that would be problematic. Another is whether the type of storage that's used by the archives is too heavy for what the floor could handle.
Right.
But that is something that that I don't know the answer to, and I don't know that anybody has looked at.
And I think the advantage would be to try to give the restaurant some more space down there to get them out of the little pantry upstairs.
Right. And
so all of that. Right.
Councilmember Schultz, were you saying something?
I was about to say something actually. And so what I was going to say was, we also should probably keep in mind what we think we might want to do with town hall, because if we make some additional storage space at town hall, we may be able to move some of the records, some of the archives and so forth over to town hall, into a good dedicated space, which would free up some floor area for both items.
Yeah. And if we were to move archives somewhere else, then potentially that space, which is closer to Black Market, and maybe more suitable for storage space, maybe that's a possibility.
Piggybacking on what Phil said, I wonder too, maybe take additional looks at kind of the future of storage. It seems like we have more paper possibly around offices than what's trending in the world. I know a lot of offices are going completely digital, including mine. so they're not completely digital, but it's just about, I can't remember the last time I printed something. So I wonder how other towns are handling this, if they're starting to move more digital too, or is that really just unavoidable with government versus business work?
So I actually, at the Montgomery County meeting or dinner last night, I talked about this with a few people, and Gaithersburg has moved almost entirely digital, at least in terms of, I don't have a 100% clear picture, but they've at least gone digital for all their council member packets. And because they have zoning authority, their packets were very, very thick and being able to have those. So they've already pointed me in the direction of a possible vendor, somebody who could possibly do a demo for us and give us some ideas. I'm a paper person. I'm here taking notes with a pen and paper. It's just kind of how I need to process things. But does that mean that if we've moved to a digital application to rent town hall, for example, that something that is previously or that is originally digital needs to then become paper versus I think it's a good idea to look at it and see if that's if that's what would fit, if we would be good fit for that. The town of Kensington uses or still all paper, and Laytonsville is the other town that I talked to last night about this, and they are also still paper.
Yeah, maybe just it might be lagging behind other industries that are maybe going, like, I think we would all go crazy if we went back to paper with the stuff that we do. It's like a lot of big documents, a lot of big files. And I mean, it's just different. So.
Well, I think that it would be, I think that there is opportunity for us to share documents digitally. I think there is lots of opportunity for that. I don't know. Is that something that you all would like us to sort of, this is a side issue from that space planning, but definitely related.
May I?
Please.
I was thinking along, very similar to what you and Councilmember Pachkowski are discussing, not necessarily getting rid of the paper wholesale, having it stored perhaps somewhere where archives are in fact stored in proper atmosphere and temperature, whatnot, and digitizing the rest, facilitating searching, use, dissemination, etc., and getting rid of the use of space in-house and making it that much more into the 21st century.
Councilmember Bennett, you've mentioned in the past wanting to reduce our hard copy output. Anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I think Donna's proposal is intriguing and might be worth exploration of, what the cost of that would be. And I'm in agreement with Stephen that just because other local towns haven't yet gone further into the paperless realm, I think we ought to explore our records management policy and see if even if we don't, I don't think we need to go completely paperless. I'm not suggesting that either. I think for the kind of town we are, we're a historic district, we have a historic archives. There are lots of reasons for us not to get rid of paper entirely, but we're probably saving a lot of paper that we don't need to. And I think we could update our records management policy and possibly reduce our storage needs. And I don't think that's a side issue. I think it's central from my tour of the town offices to the issue that one of the reasons that the space feels cramped is paper storage.
I'll throw in my 2 cents for the moment and say, Joanna, you and I talked a little bit about the use of Microsoft Teams as a sharing tool for allowing people who should have it access to the various documents. And that certainly would tie in with that, because you could basically digitize the stuff, put it in folders depending on who's supposed to have access to it. And council members could, and others could get what they need without having to shuffle through a bunch of paper.
And that would give us all access to the materials without having to be in the town office.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, how do you,
There's a, in the chat, there's a comment about security and the Postal Service lease. You see that? Chris Keller in the chat.
yes, would having a more active use, like at the restaurant, in the current archive space comport with the USPS lease? Security of the area is important. I do not know.
I don't
That's not something I've ever thought about.
I understand where you might be coming from, because one of the things is that when it comes around holiday time and everybody's shipping gobs of packages around, the post office tends to store a bunch of them in that hallway that runs back over to the archives. And so there may be some thought that people, that they want to try and keep that somewhat secure. On the other hand, I have seen people walk back there, and it may be possible that as long as they lock that one door, they're fine.
Having those packages there isn't exactly safe for anybody.
Sure.
But in terms of looking at what the post office lease requires and asks of us, I think that's something to consider, something to look into that I didn't know to look into. Thank you, Chris.
Good place to start. What does the lease say?
Okay. Barb, could you make note of that and see what we can figure out on that front?
Yeah,
Could we
I've
also
I've
double check
noted
the
it.
lease?
Yeah, I'll just send the lease to you after the meeting.
Thank you.
Could we also check the lease of the restaurant as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to send both of them to you if you'd like.
Okay.
Perhaps there's a, as you had said, thinking outside the box, maybe there's another space, or maybe it's even internal, closer to the restaurant itself for whatever their needs are. I'm not quite sure because I don't know the lease either.
Okay. Is there an appetite for, once we do a better job of looking at what our space needs are and decide what direction we want to go, is there an appetite for adding on to the square footage of the town office? I just kind of want to know, like, base level, is there appetite?
I think there's some, from what I heard in the last discussion, there seems to be a lot of consensus that getting the pantry out of the middle of the second floor space, relocating it for the restaurant would be preferable to where it is now, so that we could use that space as part of the office layout, so people aren't running up and down and moving cans around in the middle.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
So given that we have for the last 2-ish years not had renters in that space, there is definitely a loss of revenue. I mean, how do we weigh the two things, whether, to pursue another renter or get or I don't know. Well, so anyway, Councilmember DeBosch.
I do have a suggestion, actually, thinking about how this is. I do think there is an appetite to expand the offices. This is a historic town. We have presence. We should be proud of our town. I know we are. And in essence, an office, our town offices are a bit of a calling card, if you will, of what this town is and what it represents, etc. And in its current state, I'm not sure if I know how to describe what it says to somebody coming in off the street. And so what is it that we want to relay? I think it's not too much space for this town. And in concern of loss for revenue, if there is a conference room, the one we are currently have under consideration, and or the suggestion you had earlier in this meeting, people rent out conference rooms for day meetings and retreats, for instance. I know there's a number of places or organizations that look for, off-site retreat places, and if it's within the DMV, more power to us, especially since there's a metro, there's a train, there's a restaurant downstairs. That could also be used for revenue on an occasional basis or rented out, quarterly or what have you, if people need it. Especially nowadays with COVID changing people's office space outline, structures, or just getting rid of them altogether. This doesn't mean that they're not meeting ever, and they look for places like this.
One thing we need to keep in mind with that is managing that rental.
Of course.
Can't.
And the configuration and security, if we're going to try to have third parties in there to use the space, I think the space would have to be designed to accommodate that. And I don't think it's the plan now doesn't include that in the plan that we got so far.
How much different would that be if you had renters? I don't think that the same security concerns would matter, correct?
Well, there'd be doors into the third party space that could lock.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're going to have our offices, I just think somebody needs to think it through and how to manage that kind of an operation.
A conference room with two locked doors on both sides.
Yeah, but
I've seen it before.
Somebody would have to manage it, price it,
Right.
keep track of it, manage the income, manage the cleanup. And so I just think it's another layer of management. And I'm not sure the potential. I mean, the revenue right now for the two spaces, the way I looked at it, is around 30 grand a year. And I don't know if you would replicate that kind of money on a interim basis to rent a conference room occasionally to third parties. I just don't know.
Well, currently the revenue is zero, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, but historically, the revenue, if we decided to get it into a condition to rent it, I think based on Barb's project numbers, but looking back historically for what it was running for, if you do A and B both, it's around 30 grand a year.
Right. So even if we assumed that the rental rate for giving a rent, for having a lease, a longer term renter were half what it is, $15,000, then that would still be a chunk that would be hard to make up with day rentals. But would it be okay with you all for us to pursue this and just see if this is a potential way of recouping some of the rental, or is this just what do you think?
I don't think you would get a lot renting out a small space, and it would be a security issue if it is kind of interior to the office versus I think the place that probably makes the most sense diagrammatically to have that sort of a swing space, or maybe it could be used for town committees or used by people outside of the town, would probably be that space next to the elevator, the 193, because it has its own private door. If you take like the front of the main office, you'd have to, if you lock the doors both ways, you have to make sure that there's a adequate fire exit around the other way to get people out. So it probably could be done, but it's a lot of other things get kind of in there as ripple effects. So I wonder if maybe I feel like the whole thing is like a Goldilocks problem. It's the office as it is probably a little bit too small, but then taking over the whole floor, I feel like is too big. And just right is in between somewhere, but I'm wondering how you can really do just right. Like we've talked a lot about how it's not ideal to have the restaurant pantry be up in the middle of that floor, but there's really not a realistic other place to do it on the building. If they could put it on the main floor, they would. And I think you can't really put it down where the archives is for a lot of other reasons we talked about. So I wonder if maybe there's some worth in considering using that, I guess it's the southeast corner as like a swing conference room space. It could be used for, smaller meetings by the town and committees, like the one that's next to the elevator.
Okay.
And maybe just take a little bit of the former tenant space. I can't remember, I guess it's A, but not the whole thing, but maybe even take that temporarily during the rest of the, until the pandemic is fully, recovered and rentals start going back to maybe where they were 3 years ago. I'm not sure if it's going to get back to there in the next 2-3 years, maybe it could be a lighter touch into, space A, something that's reversible. So if that market does come roaring back and people are itching to get a quaint office like that again, maybe rethink it, because we don't know what's really going to happen in the future as far as maybe it does make sense to combine offices with town hall. Maybe the office, the Penn Place office shrinks again in the future. Maybe it grows even more than what has been envisioned now. So it might be a good, cheap way, since it's not like we have people beating the door down to rent that space, to, kind of try it out for a couple of years.
We haven't put it on the market either, so we don't really
Yeah.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
the question I have is, what's the right size for the office for what the Garrett Park employees and workspace needs to be, and how much of the space is, what's the right size for that space? Do we need both the B and the A additional space, leaving the pantry in the middle, or should we take it over? It's going to be a lot, you're spending a lot of money for the renovation. So I guess that's the real question. What's the right size for what we need?
I'll figure it out in give me about 4 minutes. I'll figure it
Well,
out.
if we were already spending money on renovations and there's nothing holding us to the configuration currently presented to us, I think it would benefit everyone to at least investigate possible reconfiguration and or looking into other ways of making this a resource to the town. And having said that, what is the percentage of income that this kind of is, letting go? I'm assuming it's not a huge amount.
You mean if we forego renting the A and the B space that historically we have rented?
Yes.
Well, based on Barb's spreadsheet that she did, it's around 30 grand a year for both spaces based on historical rents, if we made it available.
In comparison to the budget of the town in general, is this a huge chunk of revenue we're losing or not?
Well, it's $30,000.
Out of how much?
It's about
So
$1 million,
Is
right?
that the, yeah,
Well, so I mean,
Like 0.3% or something, right?
it's 0.3%. Okay,
I think so.
No, I think it's 3%.
Yeah, I'll go 3%.
even so.
Yeah, it's 3%.
3%.
Another way to look at it is it's roughly 6 houses worth of tax dollars. So,
oh, let's just build 6 more houses.
Yeah.
Okay.
we
Jerry,
can do
I'm just saying,
duplexes
I think we should also just be cautious not to be overly cautious and restrict ourselves. This is more than a place for staff to be working. And I would hope somewhere in the future when there isn't a COVID and we all are running around, like we used to, it's a place where people can and will visit and, reflect Garrett Park the way it is.
Agreed. Councilmember Bennett, you had your hand raised a moment ago. Did your topic get addressed or?
No, I was just thinking that even though I think it's an intriguing idea and might be potentially, used to rent out space in Penn Place for conferences or meetings, we already pretty much offer that service through Town Hall. So we're mostly competing with ourselves, and I'm not sure that the market would be large enough. So I think that's something to take into consideration if we do explore that option. And I'm not suggesting we take it off the table. I just want us to think of all the considerations. I think on the whole, all of this is there is some need there for sure, and I think we just need to do a little more exploration, and we're under no pressure to go too fast, which gives us the opportunity to be thoughtful and deliberative.
Agreed. A separate area, aside from the amount of space we need, is sort of the scope or not the scope, but the style of redesign. I know, Councilmember Max, that you mentioned that there's a possibility of receiving secondhand. I picked up a brochure for some state agencies that resell old furniture and furnishings and items from other municipalities. I don't love the idea of spending a ton of money for brand new furniture for ecological reasons, but also just because it'd be nice to have it. I agree. It would be really nice to have, the town deserves to have a positive and inviting space for our employees and for visitors. Does that mean that we are better than IKEA furniture or that we're better than used furniture? What are your thoughts about sort of that high tech or the level of design and furnishings and amenities inside or in that space that's been proposed, has been proposed?
Well, I just did a conference room with a 14-seat big conference table, and I went to this used furniture store in Gaithersburg called Gerstel's, and they refinished this conference table for us, and it's gorgeous. I mean, happy to show it to you. And it was like 1/10 of what a brand new fancy wood coffee conference table would cost. So I just think there's some ways to furnish and equip the space and not just buy new, very expensive kind of top of the line stuff. And it looked like their budget didn't really take those kinds of savings into account. But it's, so I think that there are ways to furnish the space, equip the space in a more cost-effective manner that would still be beautiful and still provide what the office space needs to look like for the town. So I think that's worth pursuing. But the first question is, how much space do we really need? One of the residents called me and said, we're only 1,000 people in the whole town. It's a little town. And I just think we have to think carefully about how big this footprint needs to be to run the office effectively. And I think that's the first question.
1,200 to 1,300 square feet if you were building a new building.
What? I'm sorry, you lost me.
If it was a new office, you would need 1,200 to 1,300 square feet
for the
total.
staffing that we've got set up in the conference room.
For what's envisioned, that would be a mayor's office, a town manager, an assistant town manager, and offices 2 and 3, a little kitchenette, an admin open office, a swing open office for somebody to be there part-time, like accounting, a lobby space, and a conference room. All totals to about 900. And by the time you take those net areas and make it bigger for a regular office building, that would be probably 1,200. Make it a little bit bigger because it's an old building versus a new building. Probably put you at like 1,300. So that's, I think, kind of shows the Goldilocks problem. That the existing office is too small, the whole floor is too big. And to make matters slightly more complicated, I think there's a very high chance that their drawing is off scale. So I'm getting 263 for the front room office, and they have 288. I think everything is marked bigger than it really is. So I'm not really sure what the real scale is here.
So we've got more we need to do on this. Let's synthesize what pieces of information, what research, what further thinking, give us a direction for where we should go with this next, in this next period of time before we try to come with a decision about how to proceed, or how actually take action.
Well, we're going to look at the leases for UPS and the restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We should verify the square footages that are on the plan to make sure we've got accurate numbers with the people who did those numbers. I think we should figure out, if we were going to rent one or both of those spaces, what kind of income would be a reasonable number. I think Barb was going to talk to somebody about that.
Barb, do you want to hold on a second, please, Councilmember Max? Barb, do you have numbers that you can share with us about that? Or is that something we should?
No, that information was actually included in the supplemental memo that I sent out yesterday. I can certainly recap that for you if you would like. That came from a commercial real estate broker.
Right.
Who actually toured the space. So I don't know if there's something else you're looking for besides that information.
No, there's that, but if you could.
Okay.
if you could recap that.
Sure. So he came through the spaces. I guess his general comments were obviously Penn Place is a very unique building, and the spaces themselves, they're corner units. They have high ceilings. There's lots of windows, all of which are positives. His comments were that the prospective tenants would likely come from the immediate area. So from a kind of a marketing standpoint, it would probably be more Craigslist, things in the post office, the town listservs, things of that nature. If we were to want to use a commercial real estate broker, probably looking at paying them about 4% of rental revenues. He said that would be pretty common. I don't know how many of you have actually toured tenant space A and B. I know Jerry Lee did that. Basically, tenant space B, the smaller one, is in better shape than A. Basically with B, it's obviously painting, carpeting, just kind of sprucing it up. Tenant space A, for reasons I can't explain, probably was not restored to the state it was when it was rented. One of the questions he asked is whether the town had assessed any kind of damages for that. I don't know the history of the space. But basically there's actually some, wall repair that is needed, same type of thing, paint, carpeting, that's wood floors, but just kind of clean it up. In addition to tenant spaces A and B, to maximize rental potential, the town also needs to make investments basically in the lobby area. Speaking of, furniture, I'm not sure where the chair came from, but there's a kind of a really ratty looking chair. The bookcases basically have too many books. He suggested that I've been doing this in my own house, there's all sorts of things about how you kind of feng shui a bookcase and how many books you have and kind of breaking it up with art pieces. So he felt that was something that should be done just to make the lobby space for the two tenants. If they have a customer who's waiting, it's a much more inviting space than it is now. There's also kind of calls into question sort of some of the discussion you've had, which is nothing probably says as much professional when you see someone kind of dragging cans of tomatoes out while, you're trying to basically create a professional image for your clients or your customers if you're a tenant in our building. Also, he's just pointed out the need of having more professional created signage, both for the town office, but also just directing people to the tenant spaces as well as to the restrooms. The figures he gave me, and he owns 2 high-rise buildings in Kensington that he himself owns and rents. He gave a figure for tenant space A of $1,300 to $1,500, which kind of equates to $15,600 to $18,000 on the high end. For tenant space B, he gave me a range of $600 to $800. That comes out to roughly $7,200 to $9,600. I don't really have for you, kind of not a building person necessarily. George could probably say what it would take to spruce up the spaces. But hopefully that information, I found it helpful talking to him. One of the things he shared about how he approaches his own building is, you can kind of wait around a long time for a maximum rent, or you can basically, try to figure out, is it worth going lower just to get a tenant? He did say, particularly for tenant space B, I think probably because of its size, that it would not surprise him, and he said he's experienced this in his own building, is that you tend to have, and I think the town itself experienced that in going back through the revenue records. Unlike tenant space A, it wasn't a space that stayed consistently rented. So there were multiple tenants over that fiscal year 2008 to 21 timeframe that I gave you data on. His comment about, that if we were to try to do, I asked him about the duration of a lease, what's common. I said, would it be 12 months? And we specifically talked about that space. And he said, well, you might be willing to accept a 6-month lease. But he said, what I do in that case is I don't let them put anything on the walls. You really limit what someone can do in the space, because you don't want to have to turn around after that tenant leaves and do an entirely new refresh that the town is investing in. So he was incredibly gracious with his time and very helpful. At least I found it that way, as someone who doesn't know commercial real estate. If there's some other questions, I think he'd be more than happy to, have me circle back around and ask him some additional questions if you have any.
That's very helpful. somebody in the town wrote to you and said that they thought that their husband or somebody had rented the space and that we could just put a, rent for rent sign up in the post office and would probably somebody would.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think that sort of echoes kind of what he told me, that it's probably more going to be not necessarily needing a commercial real estate broker, that it's sort of looking for that niche of where someone, maybe needs a quiet space to do some work, to get away from their house and be able to focus on things, which I think everybody sort of found during Zoom, during the pandemic at the height of it, when you're trying to manage things with kids and pets and everything else. So yeah, I think that kind of speaks to just kind of that informal approach that we could take if we were to rent the space.
They're just, we're nowhere near making a decision on this. So if there's no objection, I'd like to table this and circle back around and perhaps schedule a work session when we can hash some of these things out.
yeah, I think I'd like to meet with Steve and maybe Barb and maybe you, Joanne, or whoever would want, and kind of walk through the space and think through all these different options and then kind of come to some kind of consensus about what makes sense for the right size, foregoing the revenue, which looks like it's still around 25, 30 grand. If we were going to rent it, we could, paint it up and spruce it up as part of the renovation of the space. So I still think I think right sizing the space is the next big question.
Could we also add into the discussion in that case that if security is in fact a concern, is there a security concern with the fact that there is or would continue to be this pantry on that floor?
Yeah, I think that's something that we should definitely take a look at. If there's other options for what the lease says in the restaurant, and are there any other options to get them into a different place in the building?
I imagine they've, if there were a different space, they would have it. Okay, I think that's important. I'd be happy to give a tour, Councilmember Max, over the weekend if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm here this weekend. I'd be happy to work on it.
All right.
I'd like to join if I can, but I guess I don't want to hold it up, but I can't do it this weekend. But I could do another time, perhaps with Barb, or if you go a different day, I'll try to join you. So.
We'll make
Day
it
this
work.
week?
Okay.
Could we do
So,
it one evening this week, Steve? Not
later this week works fine for me.
okay, that's good for me too.
Okay, we'll circle back around on that. Okay, so let's table this and move on to new business. The installation of cameras at Penn Place. I think that Councilmember Schultz, this is something that you had given a good bit of thought. Could you join here and speak to this?
Sure. Barb wrote us a memo about the fact that in recent months, there's been several acts of vandalism at the Mark Penn Station, or at the Mark Station, and along with hate graffiti on both the parking lot and inside the station. I understand from talking to the town staff that somebody's tossed some rocks through one or more windows there at the restaurant. And so I'm thinking that maybe it's time we look at the possibility of putting in cameras now to watch those areas. There's a chance that Mark itself may put in some cameras. Apparently they used to have them in there, and I do recall them vaguely. They took them out, but maybe it's worth looking at again. Barbara's going to look into, and I can follow up, or if Lisa, if you want to, because I know you've got security and so forth. Looking at the county, apparently it's got a vendor that they use for doing cameras. Can you guys hear me okay, by the way? Just thinking I didn't.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. So the thought is that, I think some of the stuff will only get worse. If we can keep on top of it, it would be better. We can limit the access to who gets to see the video, and put it up so it's basically, it erases itself after some period of time. So unless there's an incident, you don't do anything with it, just sits there. But maybe the time has come for us to consider at least around Penn Place, putting up something to keep an eye on the area, because, you know, we just don't want to have the town look bad because of a bunch of garbage. And as somebody had said at the last thing was that, you know, the last thing you want for the last vandalism incident, someone had said that the last thing we want is for the stuff to get into the Washington Post. You know, so if we can put up cameras, sure, they're not foolproof. People can fool them. We all know that, but it may act as a deterrent. And who knows, if we're lucky, we might be able to get somebody in any case. So the thought was that we do some investigations, maybe even consider putting a poll out to see what citizens have to say. I mean, I've done a poll once before, but Barb, I know, or Elizabeth could help because we've got the ability to do polls based on our website. Maybe we put out a short poll to see what the citizens would think about at least installing a handful of cameras that would watch around Penn Place and the train station. So those are my thoughts.
Has there been any vandalism on the pool site to date that you know of, Phil?
No, we just get the we just get the standard fence jumpers who want to. In fact, we had one I think last night because we heard the diving board. And usually Gene or I go out there. If we hear anybody, we'll run out there, and we did catch them trying to steal the flags once and some stuff like that. But knock on wood, nothing destructive. I take that back. Somebody tried to throw some vending machines into the pool, but that was small ones. But I mean, nothing to speak of. Just your standard pool jumpers.
Well, I'd be happy to find out what the county vendor for cameras for, you know, who to talk to and what it would cost and what's being done and how often it's stored and who has access to it and all of that. So I can do that and report back at the next council meeting.
Is there a simple way of just putting up some inexpensive trail cameras, just kind of hide them in the trees and just as a first step, just see?
And not having them saved anywhere. See, the problem is if there's an incident, you want to be able to go back and have it saved someplace. And that's really the issue. So a live camera isn't helpful if somebody's not looking at it at 2:00 in the morning when there's an incident. You've got to record it and save it and then be able to go through it and retrieve it if in the event there's an incident for that period of time for it to be useful.
I will say that they're not the best, but for instance, I use some cameras that are relatively inexpensive that have their own onboard storage, but for a small fee, they'll store it on the cloud for you. We could do something like that. The advantage of some of the commercial ones is you get a better picture, especially in hours when it's not very bright. But I mean, certainly we could start off with something, and they're easy as I'll get out to set up. I mean, they're pretty much plug and play. And I would be happy, Lisa, if you need any help or have any questions, give me a shout and I'll do what I can.
Okay. I think given the incident was so what I would consider evil, I think it is something that we should address to have some recourse and some ability to track what the hell's going on for these.
And I don't think that's the only place that there's been incidences of issues. So I think multiple cameras, I would wholeheartedly support. Close, you know, cities all have closed circuit TVs everywhere.
What do you think about doing this, about doing a poll? Is this something that that you all think is, I mean, is this objectionable? Is there something, like, what would be the benefit? Why would we want to put out a poll for this?
Could I ask the opposite question? What would be the negatives?
I mean, we are a representative body. We were elected to make these kind of decisions. So just kind of as a philosophical thing, I mean, that's just kind of, that's what we do. And we're not Vermont. We don't generally get a lot of response to these kind of things. So I don't know how informative it would be. That's all.
I'm just
From my
thinking it's a safety issue, so I'm not sure if you're saying a poll would be good or not, but I'm not sure if there would be benefit to doing one, because this is a safety concern and I don't see a negative to keeping our town safe.
Right, but I don't know that I agree. And I support putting up cameras. I just don't know that I don't know that this is the kind of thing that, I mean, would, if 50 people responded and 30 of them said, no, we don't want cameras, would that keep us from using our discretion to put up cameras? If that's a security issue? I mean, I just don't know that, I don't know the benefit of doing a poll, that's all.
Yeah,
gonna be
no, I think
tricky. You'll only get the-
I'm agreeing with you.
Mhm. You'll only get the people who feel very strongly about it. Most likely you get the people who are strongly against will be participating more than not. Like we've seen that with other issues too, where it's just
Mhm.
the small minority that is very much against something will make the loudest noise.
So, I mean, I think we need to see what our options are. I mean, I think that's
Mhm.
what we are is,
Yeah.
Mm.
you know, what are our options?
Yeah, I mean, I assume we're really only talking about public buildings, the surrounds of public buildings, right? Penn
As
Place,
opposed
maybe Town
to,
Hall.
as opposed to like along Strathmore, is that what you mean, or?
Well, so Donna mentioned concerns about other locations, so I wasn't sure what she was referring to. I don't,
It was around the town. It was around the town offices.
oh, okay.
Around Penn.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's pretty easy for us to make the case as the representative body that we're both protecting the security of town offices. Also, you talked about risk management earlier. If there are incidents around on town property, you know, that's a concern and a risk for us.
Particularly after this incident. I mean, there was a real incident that was pretty, you know, that
Right.
needs a response, it seems to me.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. So we have our marching orders. Lisa, you're gonna look into who the county uses for this vendor. Phil, did you have a conversation with CSX about them looking into this, or was it just something that you sort of speculated on?
No, and two other things before I forget. One is I didn't mention the fact that we only have, I think, one bench left there because vandals have ripped the benches up and thrown them under the trains. So we've got the wreckage strewn along the railroad tracks. So that was one of the things. The poll was, by the way, I'm not trying to defend it per se, but just to say that the poll is only just to give people a voice if they wanted to, but I'm sure they can find us. They know where we live. That being said, no, I kind of got the impression from talking to the town staff who were there during the cleanup, and from also overhearing some conversations with a guy who was over there working on the phones. He gave the impression that they may be trying to get some communications going for the possibility of updating bringing in cameras again.
Okay, all right. Okay. Anything else about cameras at Penn Place, or can we move on to the
Just
next?
one super quick note. I wonder if it is worthwhile talking to the police to see if there's a certain system that they expect to have, like if something has to be handed over for evidence for them, like to be able to receive it. I wonder if there's any sort of format or any network. I guess that would be kind of the same as what the county vendor is, but it would be good to make sure that it's fairly seamless. And I think to keep security around.
Okay, so how would
Video
we
too.
transmit? So the system for transmitting anything that we come across.
How the police would accept the video as evidence, I think is the question.
Yeah, and possibly that vendor, when you talk to them, Lisa, maybe they know already. There might be a protocol they follow.
Okay. Or the
Is
police.
there a sorry.
Councilmember Bennett, you had something you were going to say?
I was just going to note that the county just announced a private property incentive program for security cameras. So I'm sure if someone followed up with the contact for that, they could get the kind of technical specifications that we were just discussing.
Do you know how to send me that link, Jerry, or where I can find that?
I'll forward you the announcement I got.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Councilmember DeBosch?
Thank you. Sorry. Love Zoom and Skype and all that good stuff, but I always end up trying to talk over people. So my apologies. Wanted to say if it shouldn't, asking actually, should it be a consideration also in regard to the post office being there, which is a federal agency, and whether or not they require and or have cameras of their own, which I'm surprised that they don't now that I think about it. Since they are the United States Post Office.
So like, might they have funding to help support this? Is that what you mean?
Quite possibly. And or do they have specifications that they need?
I like it. I like this idea. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Moving on to the nursery school. Jerry Lee. Councilmember Bennett, you are the liaison with the nursery school. What is going on there?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First, thanks to Barb for summarizing this issue. So there is attached to the agenda and on the website a one-pager that kind of summarizes this issue. The nursery school representatives came to me and expressed concern about the state of a small pathway between the playground gate and the first entrance to the building itself. It is in disrepair, and I would say it's a little bit of a safety hazard, speaking of risk management, as it currently is. It's a small patch. It wouldn't take much to replace that. In looking into the responsibilities for this, we reviewed the lease, and I talked to Councilmember Schulp, who previously was council liaison to the nursery school, and is the longest serving council member who's been in service since the time of the lease being signed. So he knew that we had not, as a town, there is a requirement in the lease that the town do a one-time repaving of the walkways and the parking lot, and the town has not yet fulfilled that requirement in the lease. So we, the town, are indeed per the lease responsible for this pathway and more. The pathway is what's in disrepair. The parking lot is serviceable, although it's a little bit on the shabby side. So I did discuss this with Phil, and he was very helpful. Phil, correct me if I'm misstating our sort of consensus agreement between the two of us. We recommend that the town ask the engineer to look at the site, because we think if we do any repaving, even just for the walkway, we should take stormwater management into consideration, because there is a history of issues on that site. So we wouldn't want to do some paving there and not take that into consideration. So we wanted to request a cursory check by the engineer, and just kind of get a sense of the council here about perhaps putting this on our FY23 agenda if we can identify the funding for the whole project. I think if we can't do the whole parking lot, then we really have to do the pathway for safety. And even still, if the planning for this is going to take some time, we may want to do something temporary for the pathway to just improve safety. Phil,
So-
anything else you want to add? I'm sorry.
No.
So yes, you nailed it. And I would say that we had agreed as the town to have done some repaving, some rework of that whole circle / driveway area. It was never done. I had been trying to push that, but it kept falling along the wayside. And then we got into sidewalks, and, kind of everything drifted off. But I agree 100%. We need to do something there. We owe them that. It's going to be better for everybody. And also working with the town's engineer. And the first thing I would suggest is that we see about getting a task order or something set up so that they could do a topo survey and then start to look at what could be done there. Because I don't know if we've got a good solid survey, and we would probably need a topographical survey to understand how to address stormwater and so forth. So that was where I'm coming from.
So given that it's kind of a bigger issue than just, hey, let's tear up the what we have right now and fix it. should we do the quick fix first? Just make sure that it's safe. The school or the nursery school is starting their summer camps Monday. And so, making sure that it's safe for when those camps are in session. Is there a quick fix that we could do while we try to figure out a bigger solution, taking into consideration drainage issues and how that affects the path?
Well, Monday is very soon, so I'm not sure there's something we could do to help the situation before the summer camps, but
Sure.
certainly before the fall, I would recommend that we go ahead and do something to improve the evenness of the surface to get us through the planning process. Phil's, thought we could have the maintenance team look and come up with recommendations, or maybe the engineer as part of his review could offer suggestions for a quick fix to get us through the planning process.
Agreed on both, because my original thought, Jerry Lee and I talked about, was maybe we do something temporary, even with, say, crushed stone, because crushed stone also makes a good base for either asphalt or concrete, depending on what medium we wanted to use to replace that stuff with. But definitely to peel it up, and I agree with the suggestion that maybe Jason could take a look at it and come up with something that would be workable until we can get our arms around a total solution.
I think that's an easy thing for us to ask of him. He's going to be walking the town with us next week. I think it's next week, right? Yeah. So
Yes.
That certainly is applicable. It's certainly relevant to that, so that we can put that on our list of things to talk to him about when we're going around.
That's great. And one more thing I just wanted to state for the record that I should have said at the beginning, even though the nursery school leases the space and they use the playground during their camps and school, it is a playground, it's a park, it's a neighborhood park. So it's a liability concern any time of day, and lots of people do use it year round.
Right.
Neighborhood park owned by the town. No, it's out of the town, but nevertheless, we still have responsibility for it.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, so I'm looking for a sense of the town to at least do the quick fix and get the engineer support. Any concerns with that?
No, I think it's a great idea. Do you want, as a first step, have the engineer look at it next week, and then he can help us figure out the best short-term fix, and then give us a sense of what's involved in doing a more permanent fix? Does that work?
Yeah, that would be great. And if he wants to have someone meet him there, either I could or a representative from the school could, or he could go on his own. So whatever works for him, just let us know.
Perfect. Let's see, that's the last piece of new business. Moving on to council member reports. Let's start with, oh gosh, I'm on that list. Let's skip me for a moment and go to Councilmember Bennett. Do you want to do the Arboretum updates from Arboretum Committee first, or this Strathmore development?
Yes, very quickly on the Strathmore development, the county council met today as the district council, which is the way they name themselves when they're making planning decisions. And they heard oral arguments from a representative from Symphony Park who had requested to speak to the council. And then they voted to accept the hearing examiner's recommendations and approve the local map amendment. So what this means is that the preliminary planning process will move forward, and we will still have most of the things that the town of Garrett Park asked for influence on. We were told during the hearing that they are things that would be up for consideration during the preliminary planning process. So we still need to continue our vigilance and paying attention and try to influence that process. It's a disappointing outcome, but it seemed from everything we had heard that that was the likely outcome, and indeed that is what occurred.
Okay.
And we'll continue between the town office and I to try and keep an eye on that and provide information about any events or share information as it's shared. I'm having trouble getting my notes reopened about the next item, Arboretum Committee. The committee met in last month. And number one, the tree walk was popular. I think they had over 20 folks who participated. And so thank you for those who came out. And thank you to our arborist for taking the time to share his knowledge and love of the town's arboretum with all the neighbors. It's a great way really for us to educate our young folks about the arboretum as well. We did some research, and thank you to former member Hans Wagner for finding the MOU with the Department of the State Transportation for the Strathmore trees. So we're getting clarification about responsibilities there, and we will continue to work with Barb. And the arborist. We need to probably revisit with current folks at SHA to make sure that we're all in agreement on procedures and who will do what in terms of maintaining the trees there. We're also working on some tree protection language for town construction permit approvals, and the arborist was getting some examples from other locations for that. And I believe, Barb, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a meeting with the potential vendor for the invasive vines project that's happening this week so that we can move forward with that contract.
Yeah, Julie, if I may, that actually took place yesterday.
Oh, great.
So we've started
moved it up. That's awesome.
getting proposals in.
Great. Glad to hear that. And the arborist did the assessment at Rokeby and also on the Yandle property. And so we'll continue to work with both the town office on some plantings for the Rokeby where the stormwater work had been done and it was kind of denuded. And also the committee will be able to coordinate follow-up to his recommendations related to the Yandle property. And that's everything related to Arboretum for this month.
Wow, that's a lot.
It was a lot. They've been very busy.
It was a lot. Since we're talking just there about Yandle, Phil, would you mind talking about where things are with Parks and Open Space?
Sure. I don't know. So thank you, Jerry Lee. We've been Phil Normandy did come over. He gave us a list of things that we should look at removing, and it included some invasive Asian cherry trees. I'm not real familiar with the species, but take his professional opinion on them that we should probably look at removing those when we get a chance. And we've already had two people representing two groups come in and look at the contents of the house to see what they might be interested in taking, because we're trying to get rid of as much as we can to recycle it, if you will, so that we don't end up loading the dumpster up, sending it to the landfill. We're looking at some other ideas also to see what might be able to be done to try and minimize what we're going to end up sending to the landfill. Some of the paper we might be able to recycle, for example, to get rid of it. And then we've had the people come in to do the topographical survey. I'm sure we'll get something in they were in last week, as I recall, and so we should get something shortly from that. And then we can work with Jason on looking what needs to be done as far as stormwater, if we need to do anything with regard to stormwater. We've got the environmental survey people, I believe, are coming tomorrow or early next week to take a look around, do phase one, which is a very high level survey of the property, see if there's any obvious hazardous materials that we might have to be aware of, we might have to put into our plans. And we have a little bit of good news. Apparently we had a little glitch that's being resolved, so it looks like we're probably still back on track with trying to get the life tenancy removed from there so that we can go ahead and start looking at tearing the place down and removing the contents. And finally, next Tuesday, there will be a meeting of POSCO to discuss mission statement, goals and objectives as far as the committee goes, and the latest on Yandle. And
What, in terms of what Phil Normandy looked at and saw on the property, if there's just one type of tree, there might be several of them. Are we going to lose a lot of? I mean, it's a pretty lush space. Whether it's all, a lot of it might be weeds. But is there still going to be a good amount of canopy there?
I would think so. I mean, we've got one tree, and I can send you, I should really just put out that list of what we've got, but I believe there's one tree is a tulip poplar. You might have suggested doing a resistograph on to gauge its internal structure to see whether or not we might be having a problem with that one. But we've got several of the Asian cherries, and we've got bamboo, but that's going to require some hand digging because it's intertwined with the roots of the good trees. And we've got a bunch of various vines and other junk. But he did say that there's some good things. There's, I forget, a type of vanilla in there. There's a couple other native plants that are very nice to have. So we do have a bunch of work ahead of us. Yes, we will probably take up a lot of stuff on the ground, but I can't see the canopy being affected too badly because a lot of it's very tall trees.
Wonderful. Kind of jumping around here. Councilmember DeBosch, would you like to tell us where things are with you in terms of coming up or hearing from residents, what they recommend for the American Rescue Plan funds?
Absolutely. So we met last week, the task force and myself and Barb, who I will ask if she wants to jump in, if that's okay, to add any points that I may have overlooked or not underlined sufficiently. Our task force meeting was minus one member, but very lively and animated discussion. Apparently, the top two projects that townspeople would like to see supported is the upgrade of the town hall and stormwater abatement. Those are very good projects to support. However, we would have to have a better definition as to what does upgrade mean and what does abatement of stormwater mean necessarily, in addition to the issue being that the county we're still in limbo in regard to whose responsibility a number of the stormwater issues are. But that is not all the recommendations and suggestions we had. Other points were electric charging stations, the additional support of renovation of the Endel property, city lighting, sidewalk replacements on particular parts of the town that still have yet to be renovated or are in the process of undergrounding of poles and wires, which was an interesting discussion about the poles and wires closest to the post office, how they're kind of smack dab in the middle of the parking lot / roadway, and whether that was a possibility, and a good support of upgrading the dog park, and or investigating that further, because there was information that was provided to us during that meeting that there is a cistern of some sort from way back in the day, and whether that has any issues with, does that have implications if that was to be removed, whether that has implications in the pools, and what would they be, etc., or how to remedy that. So that would require some study. And then, of course, broadband at the pool and public spaces, which actually is one of the original tasks or goals of the ARPA funds from the beginning. Now that the ARPA funds are much wider, we have a wider space to which we can apply these funds. So, once I will send notes to the council for the town's review, and ask for feedback on next steps.
Barb, I have a quick question for you about this. how onerous will the reporting process be? I mean, should we apply these funds to a single item so that the reporting is as simple as possible, or is it not that big a deal? I mean, what do you, from an administrative perspective?
Right. Obviously, we haven't expended any funds, but I have looked at what's required, Mayor, and also just kind of talking to other people who are a little bit further along in their process. I don't think it's going to be particularly onerous. I think as we talked about a little bit during the budget process, there was a thought at one time that a bunch of the municipalities would like get a shared ARPA manager. And it's so simplified at this point. I don't think that's necessary. I would certainly say that the projects, just to streamline things, should be of, somewhat significant size. I mean, just because you can use ARPA funds to do a $5,000 project doesn't mean it makes sense to do that. So I would look at kind of larger investments just to streamline it, because obviously I think if it's going to be handled internally, you just don't want someone doing, 150 projects because they're so small. I think, Donna, if I could, before we move on, just wanted to add one thing that was sort of an interesting line of discussion at the task force meeting. I know, Jerry Lee, you were on the call, as I remember correctly. But there was certainly a line of thinking that given the timing that has to be met with the ARPA funds, that perhaps the mayor and town council should give some thought to using the ARPA funds for projects that are already kind of in the works. And the one that specifically came up as an example was the sidewalk project that's in design going from Montrose down to Penn Place. And I think there were several people on the task force, and I see that Dick is actually on the call, and I think this was primarily something that he felt very strongly about. But to some degree, money is kind of fungible. So make sure that the money can actually be committed and spent within the Treasury Department requirements. So I thought that was an interesting point that Dick raised, and others I think felt similarly about it, just to make sure that we don't get caught up in any type of complications with meeting the deadlines for the funds being committed and expended.
So using the funds kind of a shell game, use it for something that we already have other funds allocated for, that then we could move around to use something else.
If necessary, because also the stormwater and the renovation of the town hall won't be immediate, obviously. And it could be used to supplement, and obviously it's not enough to fund it entirely, but supplement it for sure.
Right. Oh, Stephen, you sent around a photo.
That's the tank. In 1937. The one that, so it's maybe about 1/3 is underneath the old tennis court, and about 2/3 is underneath the quote unquote hill at the pool. So that's why the hill is up so much higher than the lap pool. So the tank sits underneath of that.
Some towns, task force members also enlightened us that that tank actually would have an effect, if you were to remove it, would have an effect on some of the wall. Supposedly, this was not studied thoroughly, and it was studied through the pool association, not through the town, but that it could affect the pool's integrity as well.
Possibly, yeah. It would be a lot of work on that upper level of the pool to take that out and get everything healed back, and it's close to some tree roots.
Right.
Sure, almost anything can be done, but it wouldn't be.
So
there would be some detail to it. So
I haven't been engaged on this. Can someone give us a quick synopsis? Do we have to remove the tank? Can we remove the contents and leave the tank? I mean, I don't even know what's in it. That was the first photo I'd seen. Can somebody bring me up to speed?
So that tank was that was used to fill steam engines back in the day. And my understanding, I think, from the historian in the neighborhood named Phil Schultz, was that there was a pipe that ran from that, went into the tracks, and then went down to Kensington Station, where there was a water tower there that filled the actual engines, but the water was kind of rainwater was collected there. So most likely it's brick or stone or something like that that makes a ring, almost like a above ground pool, and it's just been buried in there. So it's probably just sitting empty. I don't think there's any water in it. I think it's all just dirt and rocks and stuff in it.
But apparently it's also sinking. It's
Okay.
Yeah, it
whatever
didn't settle.
materials it's
Yeah.
made of, it's degrading.
Yeah.
Well, let's back up for a second. So Stephen was right. It was a water tank. It was a round water tank used to collect water. They pumped water from Rock Creek up to the tank. It flowed down, piped across the bridge over Kensington. Anyway, when CSX got rid of the property, and it's a long story, but they sold it to the pool. The pool sold half of it to the town so we could block a bridge from coming through, which is why things are the way they are. But I think somebody had probably dumped some old wood in there or something, because the thing began to settle. And you can actually see part of the original brick surround is over at the pool. And so Chris Keller and I have been kind of championing keeping that as a historic piece, because it represents the real water tank. The part that's settled was the part that's over underneath the tennis court. And what had happened was, I think nobody bothered to take into account the fact that thing could settle. So a couple of times people tried to patch it by just putting more asphalt over the top of it, and it continued to settle. We did look, I don't know, 5-8 years ago. I know when Ted was still around, if anybody remembers him. We had looked into it, and we determined that it was not a brown field. We determined that it was probably not anything that we had to worry about hazardous waste. The biggest thing we wanted to do was probably either dig up the edge that goes into the dog park area, or at least put something solid over the top so that any additional subsidence would not bother whatever's above it. And the thought was probably more along the line of digging out what was there so that we could create a decent base for what might go on top of it. The part that's underneath the hills, we call it, on the pool area, I haven't seen that thing move a bit. And we need to do some repointing on the bricks of the parts that's exposed by the pools by the end of the lap pool, the railroad end of the lap pool. But there's really no need to do anything there other than to maybe put some weep holes in to prevent some water pressure. But I would say the only spot we'd have to worry about is really that's underneath what's currently the dog park that we can see. And you can see the half circle there of where it subsided.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. Councilmember Paskowski. Oh, sorry.
Just to close out, we also discussed during the task force meeting for ARPA funds, because of the more lenient approach of those funds and reporting and spending of those funds, the town would not require much rigorous or structured application process, which is what we were anticipating with the original way the ARPA funds were structured. So the task force itself is at this point just for recommendation's sake and of projects, and not necessarily the process in which to spend funds, which is one of the original pieces of the task force.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Paskowski, you want to start with historic preservation or land use, or the joint meeting of the two?
Yes. So I was going to combine them all. So it was fun. Last week we had, to my knowledge, it was the first meeting of, I guess, a joint meeting of the Historic Preservation Committee and the Land Use Advisory Committee. It was great because all 5 members of Historic Preservation came, plus one former member who came, contributed a lot. All 4 members, the current members of Land Use Advisory Committee, were also there. So it's great to have everybody together all in one session. Arboretum was represented, so Jerry Lee joined as the liaison for that committee, as well as Sean Conlon, who is the chair for that committee. So they were in the conversation, and thank you, Joanna, also for joining that. So we probably had, I guess, around 15 people there. So it seemed really quiet at first. Our goal was to really kind of refresh on the history and the mission of each group, and kind of recent and upcoming work. And we ran through that and it was pretty quiet, but then once people started going, it seemed like the discussion could have gone on by about 10 people until midnight if nobody called it quits. So it was great to kind of open up that dialogue. And I think we'll try to do that in the future. So the goal of it wasn't really to go and have a lot of action items and put pressure on people to really do a whole lot, but it was helpful, I think, to just open up that dialogue between the committees. And one of the things we also did was to distribute copies and kind of refresh everyone's memory on land use task force, which did a lot of work in, I think it was 2009, 2010, might have even gone back to 2008. So it's good to kind of get, blow the dust off of that. No action on it yet, but it seemed like a fair amount of interest in a lot of things that were recommended back at that time that they really should be revisited to see if they should be worked into the way the town does business in the future. And like I said, luckily the groups will meet again jointly going forward. I think it's going to be a good venue if certain committees are kind of seeing something as a pattern in their work and they think it maybe overlaps with another committee to kind of be able to do those sort of joint sessions. So there was some discussion in that meeting last week just about how things are handled in the town right away, like how trees are protected, how driveway permits are dealt with, what's important as far as the historic landscape of the town streets versus the town as a whole. There's a lot of good stuff in that meeting. So I think there'll be more of it in the future.
Wonderful. Steve, let me ask you just directly, do you think that you or I is now an okay time to mention sort of the thinking about the White Flint pedestrian path? I guess I'm raising it now, so kind of have to.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to kind of get additional thoughts on it.
Okay.
Do you want me to describe it, or do you want to describe it?
No, please. It's you started.
So I think it seemed to be the issue. There's a lot of grumbling around our town and neighboring communities about the pathway that went from White Flint Park, I guess the community park, over to what used to go to the back of White Flint Mall, and then was used temporarily, I guess, after White Flint Mall was demolished to be able to get over to where that shopping center is, where the Aldi and the PetSmart and all that business is. I think a fair amount of people walked and rode bikes through there. Been a lot of chatter on listservs and so on and so forth about it. It seemed, or not seemed, but what the rubbing point was on it is Lerner owns two properties. So they own the big property that had the mall and its ring road. Then they own a second property, which is a satellite lot that was on the other side of the ring road. And that's where that sidewalk is that went up to that shopping center, is right on the borderline of those two properties. So from their perspective, their whole property is all those two things together. And I think from other people, from just the general public, they feel like it's a public road, but it's really not. So we think we have a decent idea to be able to kind of get around that. I think it's incredibly reasonable. I see this all the time on construction projects all around the country where somebody's really doing a redevelopment of a city block. They get some concessions from the city, maybe to get some space to do lay down. And usually contractors are really happy to have it if they can. Like sometimes they don't have it. Like big building was built in Kensington recently where all the stuff was in the street. It was really difficult for them to work over there. So they would probably love to have this situation. But what I think could work is to have a way to get it carved out where the eastern end of that parking lot that is on the Lerner property that's supposed to be transferred to be, after that whole area is redeveloped, it's supposed to be transferred to be an expansion of that White Flint Park. If they would allow a pedestrian path across the eastern end of that lot, maybe it only needs like 10, 15, 20 feet, and then do a connection between there through the woods down to where the playground is on one side, and then have it go across that parking lot and maybe it might have to turn a left and a right, but bring you out next to PetSmart in that parking lot. So, in the physical sense, it's feasible. And Joanna and I took a look at it last week to see. So it is feasible. It's just a matter of, I think, getting enough ears opened up to it to find a way to get it done. But maybe Joanna, if you wouldn't mind, talk about that part more.
I think that another way to approach this to get I never remember what it's called, Parks Department, but it's not Montgomery County. It's the it's the regional parks group.
Yeah, MNC PPC.
Yeah, what he said. I think one way to try to get them also to bite on this and to sort of try to claim or try to get a down payment on this land, this maybe 10-15% of that land at the back, where it's not in the middle of their property between the two properties, but it's sort of at the back of it, is also how this area could help further the park's master bike plan, because there is a path behind that plaza that is in the works at part of that master plan. And so this would potentially be a double dip here, is it could extend the bike path from over by Nebel Street into the White Flint neighborhood, but it would also allow pedestrian access to the plaza. So where we are now is working to establish communication with parks so that we can get them to try to open up a dialogue with Lerner and see if we can get a down payment of some of the land for this purpose.
So realistically, they should be able to stage a big project like that just fine if they keep 9 cents of that parking lot versus all of it. So I think it's would be seen as pretty reasonable by contractors just about anywhere. So
We can hope.
yeah, so they haven't been incredibly reasonable so far, but maybe this will change it. It seems like they have a really strong reaction to having that path open up between the two properties, or along the two property lines. So
right, but if we can, show them that this wouldn't be between the property lines, it wouldn't put any danger for people crossing over where construction is being staged. It's I think it's perfectly reasonable. So we'll just have to see if we can get some traction with this. All right. Anything else from council members, or are we ready to move on to the town manager's update?
Just a huge thank you to Stephen and to you for looking into that issue and some options, because there clearly are a lot of residents who are very interested in having that walkability feature reestablished.
Absolutely.
So what's the next steps for that to proceed? Who's going to do what?
Steve is working on a letter with some of the technical aspects of it, and I am reaching out to parks.
Okay.
it would be a letter from all of us, correct, Joanna?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'd be looking for everyone's review and edits and so on, just to kind of get it the best shape we could before it goes. So
Is there a Garrett Park Estates Association or anything that would be adding their support to it?
We hadn't thought about that.
That's a good idea.
there is
they
one.
do have an association, and I'm sure they would be interested in
Yeah.
either sending a companion complimentary letter or
Okay,
signing
Or
on.
signing on to this one. Mhm.
And also, State Delegate Carr has offered to spearhead a letter coming from our District 18 representatives to also show support for this. Karine, I see your hand raised. Could you turn on your video so we can see you, and then we'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you. You're muted.
Hi, I don't usually use my phone for Zoom. So yeah, so this sounds great. I mean, it sounds like it could potentially be a nice permanent solution, especially if construction gets underway. But meanwhile, there is no construction, and it would be nice to, in the short term, still request access through the path we've had access to for decades now. And as I've said on the listservs, a county council candidate has offered to organize a meeting, at least with neighbors who are interested in this, and a representative from the Lerner companies. I'm not sure how helpful that is going to be, given everything else we've heard so far. But this is Lorianne Sales, the county council candidate, and she asked if I could refer to somebody who would like to organize this. And also she wants to know which neighborhoods would like to be represented if there's a meeting. And she'd like to know basically representatives from each of those neighborhoods. So I don't necessarily want to be the representative from Garrett Park. I think there should be somebody from Garrett Park. There should probably be somebody from Garrett Park Estates, Citizens Association, or whatever they have there. And I've asked somebody I know in Randolph Hills. I know they have a Citizens Association, even though it's relatively far. I do know people do use that path from that neighborhood as well. I do think there's a lot of neighborhoods and probably others north of the path that are affected, but I'm not as familiar with those groups. So, and I feel like between Barbara Matthews and other people on the council, there might be some knowledge of how to reach out to the citizens associations in the area. So if there is such a meeting, if there's some value in it, that we're at least well represented, and it's not just totally random and shows like to very little interest on the part of people in actually having this open. Because if whatever you're proposing sounds like it will take at least months, maybe even years to have happen. And meanwhile, it would be nice to be able to walk there, especially since there's no construction, no sign of construction, no permits, as far as I can tell, no plans. So there's no reason for people to be blocked from going the way we've always gone.
So as I've mentioned to you, I prefer that the town government stay back from this sort of short-term fix. I think that it's better for us to focus on something that is a longer-term fix.
I think it's useful for the town to be able to manage both options. I mean, to take on both tracks, because waiting for 2 years or whatever frame it's going to take for you to negotiate this is it's just a huge waste of time for people who want to just go there. I mean, I actually go on Friday afternoons pretty typically and go get groceries now that we have all these open. I like to go to UPS store when I need to return something, or go to PetSmart and get some bird seed. There's so many times I just like to go there and I don't want to wait for 2 years. I think the town should have enough bandwidth to also participate in trying to advocate for the short-term opening when there's absolutely no physical reason for that path to be closed, other than the learners deciding that they don't want people on their property, which I don't think is a valid reason.
Thank you for that. I don't think it's an issue of bandwidth. I just think that it's not, I just don't think that it's wise. I think that that taking part
I would like to ask the other members of the council if you have anything to say, and I don't agree with Joanna Welch's summary decision not to participate in any of this, and it makes us seem like we don't care. I guess everybody just likes to drive, and you've just given up to the car-centric culture, but that's really, I do think that's a bad decision.
Thank you,
and
Corinne.
it's a lot
I'm happy to open this to the others.
Service to environmentalism without actual,
we hear you.
Commitment to anything.
We hear you, and I am happy to open the floor to council members if one of you wants to weigh in differently. There's no problem with that. Anybody want to chime in on this, or is this something that we can floor is open.
I have a question for Stephen. Stephen, do you have any thoughts about the timeline that might be required to enact the proposal that you're working on?
I think it would probably take weeks at a minimum just to get a reaction from powers that be, but then it would also take probably more weeks than that to go and blaze a trail on both sides and set up all the fences and move it all. I wish there was a simpler solution, but I think going back to the other thing, I think Lerner's been really firm that they just no ifs, ands, or buts. They want to keep the perimeter around all of that property they own. And my understanding of it is that they had an incident on that property, and that's why they are doing that. Is because from their perspective, it's a liability issue if they don't keep everyone off of their property. So if you put the path back in the middle, then you're opening back up again. It's not to say that there aren't places around the world where they've done that, where it's been kind of like a pair of fences that kind of makes a chute between two properties. Some people might do that, but they've been choosing not to do that pretty sternly, I think, for a while now. So I'm just not sure if we're going to have any luck trying anything else except for, showing them a way that there could be access that stays outside of the fence that they insist that they have. But yeah, I think that to answer your question, I think it could take, a couple months probably at best to do it. It's not a lot of work. It's just getting people agree to do it and getting people out there to do it.
Would anybody like to speak to the idea of try to persuade that the town government should be involved in this? Okay. My perspective on this is that is that I don't want to hurt the chances of us finding a permanent solution by digging in our heels on this other aspect. We definitely want to have long-term access to the space or to the plaza. And I don't want us to shoot ourselves in the foot as a town government by jumping in on both fronts. So, okay, let's see. Town Manager Matthews, your turn.
Sorry. Thank you. Just kind of hit some highlights. I know it's getting late in the evening. So on the financial side of things, I would say everything's looking pretty good as of the end of May. As I've mentioned before, compared to last year, our income tax receipts are down by about $38,000. Having said that, it appears that the town was very conservative in how it budgeted income taxes for FY 2022. So I don't have any concerns based on historical trends. We'll get one more larger payment in the month of June, that this revenue source should meet or even likely succeed the budgeted level. I did just want to call to your attention, I've mentioned this before, that the County Council earlier this year kindly approved a $5 million supplemental appropriation for municipal tax duplication payments. We did receive that money in our bank account on May 3rd, and that's reflected in the report. And our share of that $5 million was just a little over $44,400. Also, just because I know there's been community interest in this, I provided this information to you all previously, but we did get our invoice from Electech for their services for our 2022 town election. That invoice was in the amount of $4,656.25. And that basically includes everything that Electech did for us. So that would include their on-site staff person, their design and printing of the ballots, as well as the rental of the scanner. As far as capital expenses during the month of May, we did finish, as you know, our sidewalk improvements project. It was part of that with DNF Construction. So we did make that. We only got one invoice and we made that payment during the month of May, and that was $143,848. And also, and I did want to call this out, the reserve changes that the town council authorized back in April, this was ordinance number 2022-3, are reflected in your May report. So you will see the adjustment in the reserve for Yendel. Also, the increase in just sort of the general reserve, and basically we did make those payments out to the tenants whose security deposits we were holding for reasons that I'm not really clear on because they moved out some time ago. And then we just did some, just sort of technical corrections. I did also want to mention, and Mary Retke and I had a considerable discussion about kind of how she wanted to reflect this. It's pretty clear at this point that we will not spend any of the ARPA funds, the first tranche that we received in FY 2022. When you look at the reserve summary, you will notice that Mary has shown the ARPA funds as part of the reserve. And I think her thinking in that, and I don't disagree with her, is that those funds are restricted by law, and we have kept them segregated. So Mary thought that would be a very transparent way of just sort of reflecting that. I think so. That's kind of the highlights of the financial part of it. Before I move on, are there any questions from anybody?
It was the voting, the total cost for the company that did the ballots was $4,000. Is that the total of what we spent for them?
Right. It was a little bit, just under 4,700, but that was everything we paid to Elect Tech.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, there were certainly a few other election expenses. Obviously, we paid our judges and we paid our poll workers. I have been pinch hitting since now that we have Lisa, and Lisa, I will connect you with Claire McDonald since you're the new liaison to archives, but in the interim, I didn't want to let all the good work that Claire has done go unnoticed. So one of the things that she has worked on since your last meeting is setting up the Women of Garrett Park exhibit in the post office lobby. If you haven't had the chance to see it, this exhibit highlights the many contributions of Garrett Park women, and the time frame runs from the early 1900s on, and it features photographs and oral history excerpts from the archives. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen that to check it out. The Archives Committee did meet on May 16th, and one of their discussion topics was possible future projects and exhibits. And one of the things they're discussing is doing an exhibit on the Chevy houses in Garrett Park. As far as just other things, I think you probably have seen Empire Landscape doing work around town. They are contracted to do currently contracted to do a removal of a total of 14 trees. There were 4 trees that will take place, let's see, next week, starting next Wednesday on the 22nd. These were 4 very large trees along Oxford. We didn't want to interfere with the school, so I did coordinate with them in scheduling the work with Empire. Students' last day is Friday. The teachers will be out, so it seemed like a good time to let Empire do their thing. I did want to mention, and I know that this is something Joanna and I have talked about, is there are a lot of trees in town that just need to be elevated. Basically, things have gotten a little overgrown. So Phil Normandy did go out at my request and just sort of look for other things that we might want Empire to do before we wrap up this fiscal year. I did sign a supplemental work order with them. There'll be a few additional tree removals, basically for trees that are not in very good shape, pretty much half dead. He also identified a need, particularly around the Rokeby area, to do a lot of deadwooding, kind of removing that from trees, and also some elevation work. I shared that list with the mayor, but if anyone else is interested, I'd be happy to send that to you as well. One of the things we've been carrying from a procurement standpoint is finalizing a new lease for our office copier and scanner. Our current lease expires in September. So basically just to sort of streamline things, and generally you get better pricing if you go through the state contract than we would do on our own. Elizabeth and I worked and contacted a number of vendors to get what they call NASPO State of Maryland contract pricing. When I sent this memo out to you last week, Ron Bolt was in the process of reviewing the lease documents. He's completed that. I sent those back to Nauticon Office Solutions, which is a Toshiba dealership. So just kind of making some few technical corrections, and then I'll be signing that lease. The new lease will result in annual savings of a little over $3,000. So thank Elizabeth for her help with that. And she actually road tested the Toshiba machine up at Nauticon's office up in Gaithersburg just to make sure it was okay. Our maintenance team has been really hard at work with all the typical things that happen this time of year, mowing and watering a lot of our trees and flowers. And I did want to mention to you, obviously we are short-staffed currently. This was something Joanna and I have talked about. So while we're kind of going to be pursuing the hiring, one of the things George and I agreed is that the biggest thing that we could do to help them would be to get them some assistance with mowing. So earlier today, I did sign a contract with JC, who is known to many of you in town. So hoping that he can get started soon. And it's basically, we have a weekly rate. We'll just continue using him, probably through the summer months, just to give George and Frank a bit of a break and the ability to take some time off and during the summer months. And I think as we already sort of talked about, we did do the walkthrough. I did not do it because I have a bum foot right now, but Phil Normandy did a walkthrough with 3 companies to look at the invasive vine pilot project that we'd like to undertake. Adam from the Arboretum Committee also kindly joined us. And as I said, I got 2 proposals already from 2 of the 3 companies. So that is moving along, and I'll certainly keep you posted. And I'm sure Phil Normandy will do the same at the Arboretum Committee meetings. So that's it. Certainly would be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Doesn't look like it. I want to mention before we adjourn that we, just to make it public, we're meeting next week. We're conducting interviews for our new town manager. That will take place on Monday. And we're going to do that off campus. So we're moving along on this, and it's possible if there's an obvious choice among the people that we interview that we'll be making an offer in the coming week or so. So this is moving along, and in the interim, Barb is with us. We've extended her contract to the end of July, so that will cover any transition period. So we're not gonna just without the support that we need from that office.
Yep.
So if there's not anything else, then I would like to adjourn this meeting. Time is 9:37. Thank you very much.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.